And we will make a start. Well, welcome everybody to our webinar series through the National Association of Enabling Educators Australia. We call ourselves NAEEA. And we're an Australian organisation that supports all educators that are in the foundation, access, preparatory sort of programs that help students to be able to gain the academic skills that they need to get into university. So this is our webinar series that we are starting to run again, and we're hoping to sort of run these about every 6 to 8 weeks. First of all, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country and to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today and pay our respects to the elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here in Australia. We know that we have some representatives here from New Zealand and also some coming in from South Africa. So we'd like to also extend our acknowledgement across there. I'm presenting on the Bundaberg campus of CQ University, and here we have the Tarablang Bunda, the Goreng Goreng, the Gureng and the Balay peoples. So our association, as I said, represents enabling and pathway educators, and it is a membership type of organisation. And it allows people, if you're interested in being a part of our organisation, it allows you to participate in special interest groups. And we have quite a range that I'll show you in just a moment. It'll gives you regular updates on the sector and what's actually happening. We actually also cross-collaborate with our New Zealand colleagues and also our UK colleagues. It provides a number of professional development opportunities for our members. There are small grants and plenty of collaborative research projects underway. And we also offer biannual conference, and our next one's going to be in Darwin, which is this next slide. So actually this year on the 2nd and 3rd of December, we are hosting our next conference in Darwin. Now, abstracts have been extended until the 16th of August. So if you'd like to come along and present, we have 3 different types of programs or presentations. You can do a 10, 15-minute one, you can do a 20-minute one, or you could run an actual workshop. But it's Darwin, I don't know how many of you have been to Darwin. It is the most beautiful location. And yes, it is their hot season, but they have amazing air conditioning. It's definitely a place where you really want to go. It's got to be on your to-do list. It is a glorious place to visit. So in regards to the special interest groups, I oversee the special interest groups, but I only play a tiny part. We have 12 different special interest groups, and each one of these are led by 1 or 2 of our colleagues. And there's just so much happening in this space. And these special interest groups, not only do they get together to talk about what they're experiencing in relation to these interests, but they're also doing a lot of collaboration. They're doing research, they're doing presentations. Like, there's a lot happening in this space. But as you can see, this is the list. We have, as I said, 12 different ones. So there's plenty there that can tweak anyone's interest. So I really encourage you, if you'd like to be a part of this, have a look at our NAEEA membership and come on board, because there are a lot of opportunities for you. So in regards to our webinar today, there's just a few protocols. We've got here, please keep your mic off, but as you may have noticed, it's actually automatically turned off. Just due to experience I had last time. So it's off at the moment, and we will look at how to turn it on at the end of the session. Please use the chat, because we would love you to pose questions and to even comment, because the team will be watching that and then collating some ideas or collating questions, which we will talk about at the end. So there will be time for a Q&A at the end. Now, this session also will be recorded, and we will share it via the NAEEA website and on our socials. So today's webinar is brought to you by the Mental Health and Wellbeing SIG. The title of today's webinar is Defining and Delimiting Student Support, Insights and Challenges in Enhancing Support and Wellbeing for Educators and Students. Today I have a number of presenters here. We have Associate Professor Susan Hopkins from the University of Southern Queensland. We have Dr. Kieran Ballou, University of Southern Queensland. He's going to tell me I've said that name wrong. I did it right. Great. Dr. Gemma Mann, CQ University. We have Anna Larson, CQ University. Marguerite Westacott, University of Sunshine Coast. And Juliet Subramanian, done Western Sydney University. And I'd also like to acknowledge my co-webinar facilitator, Dr. Susie Syme, Professor Susie Syme, who's on the screen as well. So to make a start today, I am going to hand over to Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Trixie. And thank you, everybody, for coming along today. As Trixie mentioned, this project we're going to be talking from or about has come from the Mental Health and Wellbeing SIG Special Interest Group. Marguerite is going to tell you some more about our SIG. But this project, we are all enabling educators. So for those of you from New Zealand or elsewhere that are not familiar with that term, essentially, we all teach into programs that are designed to academically and socially prepare students for university. So if they can't gain access to university by traditional means, they would do an enabling program, I guess it's an Australian term, to gain access. We are very excited about all the research that's going on in the field of enabling education generally and broadly. Many of our colleagues here in Australia are doing fantastic work in this area. We have felt that there are still many things in our field that are unknown or under-theorised. And maybe that's a bit of a background in sociology in my and Susan's case. I made the observation that different people, different stakeholders may define and may view student support or supporting students quite differently. In fact, I think this project began with a rather cynical thought where I suggested that maybe policymakers might sort of dust off their hands and go, well, we have funded student counselling and academic learning centres to support students. You know, we've given you money. What more do you want? So somewhere out of that very cynical thought, this project was born. We do see student support mentioned and talked about a lot in the current political climate. I like to think that we all cheered when the Australian Universities Accord final report came out, and there was lots of discussion around student safety, student wellbeing, and preparatory project programs, enabling programs. Recommendation number 12 basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, give us more money and support enabling programs. So I do think that we all cheered when that happened. Another apparent focus in that university's accord was this idea of student wellbeing and mental health and safety on campuses for students and staff. So we believe that, student support was very, very central in the accord. The term supporting was used 83 times in the accord in different contexts. So that includes supporting students, supporting universities, supporting social cohesion, and so on, many, 83 times. So as enabling educators as active members of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Special Interest Group, we kind of feel like we might be onto something in this area at this particular time with this particular political climate. So we really aim to fill a gap in the research and in the literature. The report, while it speaks a lot about student support in a sense, there is very little information regarding what student support actually looks like, how it is defined, how it works best, what is most effective and what is not, and of course, what is most effective within our enabling and pathway programs. So there's some sort of data that suggests there is no real consensus around how enabling educators, how we define and what is the nature of effective student support, whether that's on campus or online for our students. So we've set out to try and fill this gap in the literature, and we want to explore student support as a really complex idea, especially when we're working with students belonging to marginalised or equity group backgrounds, especially when we think about how student support impacts us as educators, our work lives, our emotional labour, our mental health and well-being, because we are very much at the coalface. We are the first point of contact for our students. So we got together as active members of this special interest group, and we have done an autoethnography where we had written reflections that we have used as our data. So you'll hear my colleagues referring to our reflections, and you'll hear some quotes from those reflections. We wanted to really explore the lived experience of enabling educators as we support students in our daily work lives. And basically what we found was that there are a number of tensions. For example, there are some pressure, some expectation that we have almost limitless enthusiasm and passion and emotional labour for our students, spent on our students. But at the same time, our role involves really strict, high academic standards and very holistic care, personalised care, flexibility, personalised feedback on assessments, and so on and so on. So when it does come to supporting students, we get the benefit of seeing them transform. We get out of bed in the morning because we get to see our students grow and thrive in the university environment. And I'm certain that none of us would have it any other way. But we do live with these tensions in our work lives. As we care for our students, as we support our students, in this current climate with time pressures, intensified performance expectations. So we believe really strongly that it's worth all of us kind of getting on the same page around what exactly it means to support students, what's most effective, and what we need to care for ourselves and care for our students. Next slide. Thanks, Trixie. Shortly, if I just do a quick overview, shortly Marguerite is going to tell you a bit about our special interest group and its history. Then Gemma is going to talk about the tensions around student support and the emotional side of student support. Kieran's going to follow Gemma and talk about the academic side, some tensions there. Juliet is going to be speaking about a multitude of tensions around the neoliberal university and the context of the university, which of course we all work in. I'm going to point us back to the broader discourses around social equity before Susan concludes the session. But throughout this webinar, I hope that you can really think about and focus on the many different facets of student support, what that looks like in your daily work life, in your experience, in your program, at your institution. Think about how you would define student support and how, in an ideal world, if you had a magic wand, how some of these tensions that we're going to talk about might be resolved. And if not resolved, how you can live and work with those tensions existing around you in a way that cares for you and your own mental health and well-being, as well as the mental health and well-being of your students. Also, please consider supporting this research that this amazing team is doing. We will be presenting more findings at the NAEEA conference in December. The Trixie's already told you a little bit about. We're very excited about that. So I hope that you will come along and listen to us speak then. And please note, we do have a publication plan in place. We do obviously plan to publish these findings. So stay tuned for some more information on that in the future. And now I'm going to hand over to Marguerite.
Lovely. Thank you, Anna. And hello, everybody. I'm participating in the webinar from the Gubbi Gubbi or Kabi Kabi country on the Sunshine Coast from the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. So my job is to give you a bit of a background on our special interest group and about sort of who we are, where we've come from, etc. So the group was initiated in 2015 under the leadership of Dr. Nicole Crawford. Some of you might be familiar with Nicole's work. At that time, there were 3 universities represented in our special interest group. In just 3 years, the membership grew to 15 members, which represented 6 universities across Australia. And today, as you can see on the slide, our membership has grown to include the representation of 11 universities across Australia. And this is really a testimony to the priority that enabling education sector places on the mental health and wellbeing of its students and practitioners. We're now chaired by Dr. Susan Hopkins, who speaks to you today as well in the webinar. When the group initially formed, student wellbeing was our focus, and full admission, confession, I've been in the group since the second year of its formation, so been around a little bit for a while. So when it was first formed, our focus initially was on student wellbeing, but within 3 years, staff wellbeing was included as a very important consideration of the nature of working in the enabling sector and navigating the emotional labour, the event of COVID-19, managing change, and the realities of working in the neoliberal institution. Our collaborative work has identified and analysed the unique characteristics of the enabling sector of education pertaining to student and instructor wellbeing. And this has been right from our very first conference paper back in the 2016 FABENS conference, which is the New Zealand equivalent to our NAEEA conference, where we presented on the models of support for student wellbeing in enabling programs in the universities that we each represented. Since then, we've collectively published on the emotional labour demands on enabling educators and a reflective paper on the impact of COVID-19 and the effects of change fatigue and the precarity in pandemic times. Trixie's going to throw up a slide that's got our publications on it. But the group has collaborated on conference papers, posters, presentations, and to date has published these 5 collaborative articles, which includes publishing in a Q1 journal. And our themes have really circled around what student support looks like, in inverted commas there, across our participating universities and the impact of providing that support on enabling practitioners in the context of the modern university. So that's sort of what we have been doing and what the group is. But who we are as a group, the really unique feature of our group is that we walk the talk. So our regular whole group meetings have provided a space of holistic cross-institutional sharing of our experiences as educators as we navigate and live and work in this enabling sector. We do that in the broader picture of our changing world as well, because we can't isolate ourselves, our work roles from the world that we live in as well. So we acknowledge that as group members, as a collective, that we're so much more than what we do for employment as well. We've discovered quite organically that the group has actually provided a culture of sharing, support and care for the lived experiences of what has been happening across our field. There's a sense of validation and being on common ground with colleagues when conversations are happening outside the hallways of our own institutions. So, the value of those cross-institutional conversations really validate who we are and our experiences. As well as the fact that we've had these fortuitous and very pragmatic opportunities to work collaboratively as represented from our outputs. As ideas have emerged for writing collaboratively, we tend to, the way that we do that is we tend to form a satellite group of people who are really interested in contributing to the paper, for example, because we also keep the integrity of our home group, the whole SIG as well. And we like to keep that integrity as a group of, one of discovery, learning and dialogue. And participating in the writing is entirely voluntary with dedicated group time to do that. Interestingly, there has to date, as Anna has introduced, there's been a real trend in our writing to be predominantly autoethnographical, where we're really situating the person in the wider cultural, political and social context of the institution. In the processes of the collaborative and reflective writing that we've been doing, we've experienced the phenomenon of actually the writing supporting our well-being too. So there's a whole lot of elements to what we do, and this happens as we learn about the experiences of our colleagues nationally, and develop that relational glue that supports us professionally and personally. As commonly found in the enabling sector, and as you may well have experienced if you are working in that sector, in our sector, is that our group actually mirrors the care and support that we extend to our students. So what are we up to now? Well, as Anna's overview has outlined, and the purpose of the webinar, of course, is to share how we're building on these solid foundations of student and staff wellbeing, which is, of course, our special interest group's interest. Our current project has been presented already by Gemma as an emerging initiative at the STARS conference in July. So we're really well underway. We initiated this research with reflections inspired by the numerous casual conversations being had within the SIG, and since writing the reflections, we have had many inspired conversations since. As you can imagine, the event, and also as Anna's already spoken about, the event of the recommendations from the University Accord report this year has really highlighted particularly the gaps Anna has hinted at, the importance of the work that we're doing now. So we were already on the ball before the Accord actually came out, thanks to Anna's inspiration. It probably doesn't need to be said explicitly, but I will anyway, that the value of the cross-institutional relationships that contribute to our research, teaching and engagement. And so that value can't be measured, can only be experienced. And really, on this note, I now need to pass on the presentation baton, the baton over to Gemma, who will expand on the tensions around emotionally supporting students. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Marguerite, and thanks, Anna and everyone. I'm in Rockhampton at CQU on Dirumble country, so welcome everyone today. So yeah, mental health and wellbeing is obviously the focus of our SIG, and it really came across in our autoethnographies that what is student support, and has been published many times before. It's about caring. Pedagogies of care has been talked about before by Motta and Bennett, and it's something that we strive for as enabling educators. But at what cost to us? That's the big question. That's the tension that we came across. While we'd love to support each other and support the students, there is a vast toll in emotional labour. So emotional labour has been discussed in many publications before. So what do we do? Do we choose to continue supporting our students as best we can and let our own emotional support suffer? Or do we take care of ourselves first and therefore maybe not support our students as much? Is it our choice? Is it up to us to do that? Is it an institutional requirement? Is it an expectation on us now that we support students like that, now that it's in the accord? And if we do choose to do it, who supports us? Which Margaret did allude to there, that we support each other, which is fantastic. So emotionally supporting students is very demanding on our mental health, and it does depend on our backgrounds, our mental health backgrounds, but it comes as an addition to our normal teaching load. So for example, I'm a maths teacher, but I also support students. So where's the balance? Where's the boundary there? We need to support our needs as well. So where could we get professional development from? What is professional development in this space? If the universities want to support us to support students, how? So with the first issue of our emotional labour, our data shows that there was a very big emotional price to pay because we are not robots, so they're quotes, we're not robots. A lot of our interactions are draining with enabling students. They may not have the emotional capital themselves to be able to deal with the transition to university. Some quotes that came out were that we feel triggered, tired, overwhelmed. And sometimes we get emotional and it can be debilitating. But on the other hand, we love it. We want to do it. It's so rewarding. One said, I can feel quite drained, but it makes me feel so good about myself. That's attention. Another one said, my interaction with students bring me immense joy and satisfaction, despite the fact that it can be mentally taxing. So yeah, big tension there. So sometimes as enabling educators, are we more susceptible to emotional stress and burnout? How does the institution support us with that? Some people do accuse us maybe of being a bit too caring, and maybe we should just buck up and let the students go to counsellors. And maybe we just need to concentrate more on our role for support is the teaching and the developing academic skills, and less time on pandering to our students. But as a collective, we know that's what we do. Students are a bit scared to go to counsellors. That we're the ones in front of them in the classroom. They get to know us, we get to know them, they feel comfortable with us. So in terms of professional development, what do? Do we get those little online micro-credentials on how to be better at supporting students, better at our jobs? Or is it more this cross-collaboration that we have in SIGs? A lot of us talked about things like debriefing with colleagues, just talking about our practice, chatting to like-minded people who are in the same situations, and just reassuring each other that we're doing a good job, despite, as will be highlighted in shortly, about the neoliberal pressures just to get the students through. But what gets the students through? Is it just academic skills? No, we know it's not. It's very much emotional support. So we continue and we say, I know I can do my job well, even if I feel a little upset from time to time. I can do the job despite feeling bad without changing my ability. So we want to talk about self-care and where does that fit in, and that's a lot of our mental health SIG. As I think Marguerite said, we changed from being just student focused to both student and staff focused because they're related and there's a tension. And so with that, I'll end my spiel on emotional support and hand over to Kieran.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm joining from Springfield, which is the traditional lands of the Jagera, Yagara and Ugarapol peoples. And as Gemma said, I'm going to focus on the academic side of the support that we provide. So as Anna said at the very beginning, obviously what we're doing as part of university preparation is supporting students with the social aspects of university, but also crucially, the making sure they're prepared for the academic side of things as well. And in some ways, what we're trying to achieve is to support students so that they can become independent, self-regulated learners. And this is really a goal of higher education in general. So the idea that students can act autonomously, they're not dependent on the teacher, they have agency. And this is important because there is evidence that self-regulation is key to student success. But in doing this, there's often this discourse around, well, if we're encouraging learners to become independent, to be self-regulated, to have agency, then we need to avoid spoon feeding them. We can't just tell them what they need to do. If they're unclear about things, they need to work it out. They're independent learners. This is the point of university. But in enabling education, we know that we're dealing with a particular cohort of students. Those who are enrolled in enabling programs may not be as conversant with academic language, cultures, traditions. This is obviously part of what we do is supporting them to actually, be aware of these particular kind of cultures of university. And they may not know how to seek out this information they need for their own academic learning themselves. So there becomes this balance then between avoiding spoon feeding students by telling them everything they need, but also trying to balance actually supporting them and providing them with a kind of a scaffold effectively towards this independent learning. And a lot of this kind of avoiding spoon feeding comes from this general way of thinking, not so much in enabling education, but generally across higher education, where I'll just read out this quote from Smith, 2008. A complaint I hear from university teachers is that undergraduate students require spoon feeding. They say that their students demand it. They feel that they must unwillingly oblige. The metaphor of spoon feeding doesn't match their idea of what a teacher should do or how students should be going about their learning. They complain that students just want to be told exactly what to do, the facts, the right answers, instead of thinking things through themselves. So this balance and this tension that I'm talking about is this idea that we're supporting students with their academic side of things. We're helping them to become independent learners. But what we're doing in doing that is not spoon feeding them. We're not telling them this is exactly what you must do. We're providing them with the kind of the scaffold and the support to be able to actually become this independent learner. And part of doing that is also about scaffolding, and then planning for how we remove the scaffold. If we continue to scaffold all the way through, then that's when it can tip over into being spoon feeding. So there's this balance to be struck between being inclusive, because just leaving students just to get on with it themselves isn't an inclusive approach, and then over supporting students. And this is always a balance we have to strike within enabling education, particularly because we want to be able to adequately prepare them for where there may not be a scaffolded in undergraduate education. On the next slide, we reflected on some of these points about academic support and, whether how independent learning is about empowerment of students. So in the first quote here, I'm very conscious to empower students with knowledge and familiarise them with the student services offered at the university, as it is these teams that they will need to engage with across their student life. So in what we're doing here is trying to think about, well, how do we support students to know these services exist and, seek them out? But then there's also this kind of contrast where it may be difficult for us, based on a lot of what Gemma was just talking about. We feel this kind of need, a sense of duty to be as helpful as possible. And how much is that in contrast where we're trying to help them become independent learners, we're trying to support them, but also at the same time, if we feel this sense of duty to support them in the first instance, are we then tipping over into this spoon feeding? And it's this constant push and pull between, well, what is spoon feeding? Is what we're doing spoon feeding? No, we're trying to support them, but there is a danger that if you over support, then maybe we are falling into that trap that, sometimes people are accused of in higher education of over supporting. And these last two quotes, I feel a sense of responsibility to help them myself in the first instance. I'm always happy to help and will do whatever I can. That can be very satisfying. But yeah, the main point of this tension here is how are we supporting them to become independent learners in a way that's not kind of over supporting, but at the same time, you know, still meeting our sense of what we feel is right as enabling educators. So I'll just hand over to, I think it's Juliet now.
Thank you, Kieran. I'm in Western Sydney University, and I come to you on the Darug lands. The challenges of effective support. So in the realm of enabling education and the neo-liberalised university, the challenge of effective student support is challenged by the need to balance workload demands, time constraints, and a strong desire to assist students. And as one participant rightfully puts it, I do not keep track of how long this takes me or limit my time based on workload. Obviously, I am aware that this has a knock-on effect in terms of my time that I have available to do the other parts of my role. Now, that sentiment really highlights the enabling educators' commitment, their dedication, and selflessness, which is embedded in the ethos of supporting students. But despite the exhaustion and the emotional labour that often arises with enabling educators, there is a deep inherent fulfilment in resolving student issues, and even if the efforts do go unnoticed. Importantly, the absence of workload allocation for student support really highlights a pervasive challenge, and that is the lack of recognition for this critical role in nurturing student success and their academic journey. One participant said that there is no allowance for this student support. There is no workload allocated, and I think it's just expected as part of that role, which really again reflects the attitude of many educators grappling with the weight of unacknowledged responsibilities. Time consistently emerges as a barrier in our reflections, with participants expressing the need for additional hours, more time to provide the level of support that their students deserve. One quotation from the reflections, another 2 or 3 hours in every day would help me support students better, which echoes the collective plea again for more time in a landscape where demands outstrip available resources. And to sum up the challenges, and despite all these challenges, we as enabling educators remain steadfast in our commitment to student welfare, driven by a profound belief that every student deserves unwavering support on their educational journey. I'll hand over now to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Juliet. So my colleagues and team members have talked about some of the potential tensions, perhaps even internal conflicts that enabling practitioners may experience as they support students in their daily work lives. And I just like to point your attention, broaden it a little, point it back to the big picture, the wider discourses, or perhaps if you prefer the term perspectives, ideologies, you may prefer a different term. My colleagues have definitely spoken about different aspects of student support. I'm sure it's clear to all of you that it's a very complex statement, notion, very complex term, student support. And we've almost talked about it as though you could neatly just chop it up and divide it into sections: academic support, emotional support. But of course, we know that it's not at all that simple. Every one of these different aspects comes with tensions that we may feel internally, such as a disconnect between the amount of time that we have and how much time we'd like to spend supporting our students, these time pressures. There's also potential areas of tension between us as practitioners and the university as an institution, policies and so on. There's potential conflict between us and government policy, and it's undoubtedly helpful for us to really examine all of these tensions, the personal ones and the broader ones. It's important for us, for our own mental health and well-being, to reflect on these tensions and how they might be impacting us, even if that's literally a physical tension in our shoulders. But it may be necessary for us to seek help. It may be necessary for us to debrief. It may even be necessary for us to do more than just reflect on these things. We may need to broaden our thinking. And by that, I mean broaden the ways that we think, perhaps even, try to embrace and understand other discourses, other ideologies that exist out there, because these discourses, ideologies, they are impacting every part of higher education. They are impacting equity and equity policy. They are impacting enabling programs, preparatory programs, and therefore they are going to impact our day-to-day work lives. They're going to impact our role, our thinking, our everything as we are here at the coalface supporting students. Now, it is common in the literature to hear authors talk about this contrast, this tension between social justice sort of discourses and neoliberalism, or the more managerial accountability type discourses, and it's sometimes presented as a dichotomy. A couple of examples in the reference list I'll show you shortly includes Hughes, Savage et al., Smythe and Harrington. There's definitely some research out there that presents two discourses. On the slide you can see now, thanks Trixie, is some work that I've done with a former co-worker from Federation Uni, Dr. Sue Emmett. We've got a couple of publications where we've actually taken a look at the literature, a look at the discourses out there around equity and supporting students, I guess, as an extension of student equity. And we've defined or found 4 separate equity discourses within policy and the literature. So naturally, we included neoliberalism as a discourse. It's got a focus on that marketization, the free market. It's very individualistic. It's, if I was being a cynic, I'd say it's all about the bottom line. It's all about money. It's the conveyor belt, get the students in, get them out, as many as we can. Let's go. But it's a bit of competition there between universities and so on and so on. As part of a very collaborative, warm, special interest group, I personally object to the idea of competition. So I personally don't always appreciate a neoliberal discourse. We have, Sue Emmett and I in our research, we separated meritocratic discourse from neoliberalism. So this is around, ideas of merit, that maintaining really high academic standards is an absolute imperative. And even though everybody should have access to higher education, there's that condition. Everybody should have access to higher education as long as they're good enough. But of course, we know there are many social factors that influence how we measure whether or not someone is good enough for university. And as enabling practitioners, we are very aware of those sorts of things. We also divided the social justice discourse, I guess you could say, we divided it into 2. So the first we called a transformative discourse. You could call it a human potential discourse, where the focus is definitely around valuing diversity, valuing the knowledge that students bring to higher education, but also really acknowledging that all education, but higher education in particular, can really transform an individual, further develop their critical thinking skills and all those other can I call them generic skills, further developing those, which then has a flow-on effect, having a positive impact on their immediate families and their community and the world. So this idea that, education really can change the world one student at a time. The social justice discourse, probably don't need to explain in this particular audience, but obviously the focus there is on fairness. Fair's fair. Everybody should have access to higher education. Everybody should be equally supported. Human rights, equality, and so on and so on. And we see social justice talked about a lot in policy all over the place. In fact, we see countless examples of all of these discourses in policy, in the literature. Sue and I have looked at some of the large UNESCO reports, for example. You could no doubt see all of these discourses at play in the University Accord final report. I haven't yet had a chance to do any content analysis. It's on my list. But we also see these broader discourses in our practice. We encounter them in our daily lives. We encounter them when we self-reflect and we think about our own values and beliefs. We have to acknowledge that these discourses exist, and they exist simultaneously. At the same time, there is also some potential conflict going on between these discourses. I've asked some educators, enabling practitioners in another project, their views around some of these discourses. And so far, my findings have absolutely shown that we all acknowledge these discourses coexist, but also conflict at times. I can speak for hours about how I see these discourses in my work life and in the world around me. It's obviously something I'm quite passionate about. And the conflicts between these discourses, within them, in between them, and so on. But I won't go on. I just want to take a moment to realise that in some form of discourse is going on around us. There's a much broader level rather than just those personal, internal conflicts that my colleagues have already spoken about. It's more than just the conversations that we have in our special interest group, the conversations that we have in our corridors, and what we do in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot bigger than that. Putting it very simply, these discourses are going to impact our practice broadly. They're going to impact how we support our students. They're going to impact our own personal mental health and well-being, and the mental health and well-being of our students. So yes, I'm about to hand over to Susan, who's going to conclude this session before we get into some questions and answers. But before I do that, thanks, Trixie. Just displaying a list of some of the references there. That includes the stuff I've done with Sue Emmett around these discourses and the other articles that Kieran and the rest of us have referred to. So if you want to grab your phone and take a quick photo of that reference list, now is your chance, because we are going to hand over to Susan. Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Anna. And hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from Jagera and Yugara country. Just a few points in a brief conclusion, because I'd like to allow plenty of time for questions and answers. So I think Marguerite mentioned that we walk our talk. In other words, what we've intuitively built is a kind of caring collective model where we check in with each other and we try to take care of each other and our own physical and mental health, as well as supporting our students and colleagues. Now, also, I think Gemma suggested that we believe we need to develop further professional development. So there needs to be more training regarding student support, strength-based practice, feedback literacy, and what we might call emotional literacy. You've probably got the sense that when we talk about emotional labour, that a lot of classic feminist theory is going to be very relevant here. And we have used some of this theory to provide our framework in our publications in process, and also looking at the politics of effect as a kind of coherent framework to our research. We want to move away from a deficit framework that frames or positions students or staff with mental health issues as being somehow a problem in need of individualistic or standalone interventions, and rather recognise that creating a supportive environment is everyone's business. But first and foremost, we need clear and transparent definitions of what student support actually is, both in its academic support capacity and emotional support dimension, and allow practitioners time, space, and the workplace security to reflect on that practice and define and draw limits as well. Now, as Anna mentioned, in the Australian Universities Accord, there was a call for further research on student support, and we believe that we're the experts in this space and thus well placed to define what effective student support looks like in practice, and also the tensions, complexities, and contradictions which persist in this space. As Kieran pointed out, academic support is our core business, but it also needs to be balanced, transparent, and requires careful scaffolding. And as Juliet suggested, there are many challenges that we need to acknowledge around student support in this particular wider political and economic neoliberal context. Sadly, often our efforts for student support sometimes go unnoticed. So, speaking for myself as the current chair of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Special Interest Group, I'd also like, as a final point, to encourage members to come along and join our friendly and supportive group. Please don't hesitate to contact me for further information or detail on the next meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. You've just highlighted some really incredibly important concepts and issues, tensions, disconnections, and I love this caring collective model that you're talking about, and that real balance between, you know, student agency and student support, and actually getting a clear and transparent definition of what student support actually looks like. Now is the time for some questions. So I'm hoping everybody can get a mic going. Else you can pop your question in the chat and I will
While I open it, maybe we could start by just getting people to quickly use their phones to scan that, and then I'm going to try and change these settings. Hang on 2 seconds. There you go.
Okay. So we do have a comment from Sandra Woods in the chat where she mentions about perhaps embedding student services in student learning rather than disconnected or separate from their learning as perhaps a definition. So I don't know if any of you would like to comment on that. Everybody busy with the survey. I personally would love to know a little bit more about your collective caring model and how that actually works in practice, because I think that when you're talking about that holistic sharing space and, you know, how the writing has really helped you know, debrief and identify issues and share those and validate each other. I think that's such a beautiful way of looking at things. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that collective sharing model and how you have taken that back to perhaps to your teams.
Susie, I could certainly speak to that briefly if you want. And I might, in the process, manage to answer Erin's question at the same time. So the process of an autoethnography, rather than doing, say, an interview or a survey or gathering data in some other way, we get together and we have discussions. And in this case, on this particular project, I reckon we must have had meetings spanning, how long do you reckon, guys? I reckon before we actually got started, probably I'd say somewhere between 6 months and a year, where we'd get together every 6 weeks or so and just swap ideas and talk. There was this basic idea that we wanted to do something around student support. That initial idea was there. And we just chatted and chatted. Anyone that knows me personally knows I'm a really excellent chatter. Like a yarning circle, kind of similar. So that's kind of how it started. But at a certain point, Erin, we did a more formal process
where we actually collectively wrote some questions that guided our reflections. So we had shared questions. We then each, you're right, Erin, don't apologize. So we had these questions, we called it a guide. It was a reflection guide. We then took those questions away individually, sat by ourselves, wrote our own personal answers to those questions that obviously related to our research questions. And then that became our data. And the reason why it was so, I don't even know the word, Susan's going to help me out in a minute. The reason why it was so therapeutic was because when we all came back together and read each other's reflections, there was this real sense of, yes, what they said, I feel that. It was a real sense of togetherness, and we're all in the same boat. And it was almost uncanny how aligned our views were, even though we're all in different universities and different things. So that's the world's worst explanation of an autoethnography. Google it, please. Google will give you a much better answer than I did. But I hope that to answer the other point, Susie, you can see that we just spend a lot of time in Zoom meetings sharing our thoughts. Yeah.
And that, of course, is where, your whole point about the time and, all of that comes into play, doesn't it? It is a real balancing act. So there's a few things here from Gemma in the chat, and
I
Leanne
basically wanted to say if we embed it into the actual courses or the teaching, are all of the academics who are employed as academic teachers to teach writing or teach maths, are they naturally going to be good at doing the emotional support? So is it workloaded? We've already mentioned time. So embedding is great, but what's the model? It needs more explanation. I agree.
And I think we also need to make it transparent. That came through in our talk as well, the idea that we need to acknowledge and make visible this important work, and that enabling educators, especially female enabling educators, are often sort of overrepresented, or there's a higher standard or more pressure put on them to display these caring, empathetic feelings. And as Gemma said in her presentation, that we've got to talk openly and transparently about the price to be paid for that.
Yeah, there's a paper that I did with a couple of my colleagues here at University of the Sunshine Coast, and we found research that evidenced the fact that students expected female students to be both supportive emotionally but also academically sound, as you'd expect. And from their male lecturers, tutors, etc., they didn't expect the emotional support from them. They expected that academic aspect. So there's definitely, an imbalance there for sure. I think one of the key point here is that throwing around the term, Susan came back to that at the end, throwing around this term student support, which is it's kind of a part of our language in enabling education. It's almost a given. And even the expectation that pastoral care is part of our role, but somebody's just mentioned, I've never been given any professional development in that area. And Anna and Susan have talked about the fact that this is a term that's been thrown around, but what does that really mean? And because what does that look like from different perspectives? And we're getting political, cultural, social, professional perspectives on that.
Yeah, and those are excellent points. And I'd just like to respond to Tori's comment in the chat, which is a good point. And I feel that, Tori, what you're getting at there too relates to what Anna said about how we often feel squeezed in between these multiple discourses. So sometimes we might feel that we're not permitted the time we need in this neoliberal institution to give the support we would like to. And I think Gemma quoted one of our participants saying that she is not a robot. And I think that's part of those conflicts and tensions as well. And to speak to Erin's comment, Erin, I feel like this could be relevant to your work too, because I think the other great thing about our methodology is it's about valuing lived experience as data, and people's personal histories and stories are just as important as any other form of academic data. In fact, maybe more important in this particular case.
Well, what a discussion. Fantastic. And we will have to wrap it up there because it's 3 o'clock. And I hope that everybody's managed to QR code and give your feedback on the survey. But thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be getting some more participants in your SIG. Sounds like an absolutely wonderful, sharing, caring SIG to join. So thank you all for joining us. And Trixie, would you like to say a parting comment?
I just would like to just announce the next webinar that we have coming up on the 30th of August. And this is quite an exciting one because these are 3 of our colleagues who have just had a book released, and it's on critical enabling pedagogies. So that will be our next webinar, and you will see more promotion coming up around that. But look, I'd like to thank each one of our presenters here today from the Mental Health and Wellbeing SIG, and for everyone for attending today. And I hope that you can take something away from today's session. Thank you, everyone.